Hey everybody, welcome back to Watercolor with Hollis. It's me, Hollis. Hope you all are doing great today. Hope you're having a good week so far. Today I am working with a little bit of a heavier weight paper, so I'm using a 300-pound watercolor paper today. So I'm getting it really nice and saturated. Before I get started mixing up my colors here, I made sure I let the water kind of sit on the page for a few minutes before I went with another coat of water, just to make sure the paint I'm putting down is dispersing the way I want to. I'm working on doing a little bit more of a landscape painting today, so I have a very, very strong fondness for foggy mountain scenes. I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's part of that kind of natural rainforest, or not tropical rainforest, but temperate rainforest, and so I really love watching the clouds move between mountaintops and peaks and things like that, and so that's kind of what I'm working on today. It was a really nice kind of misty, foggy, magical day when I was painting this, and I have a really good view of some fogginess from my apartment and when I walk my dog and stuff like that, and just in general areas when I'm walking around town. So this is inspired by all lovely hillsides that are close to where I live. So obviously I went in with some gray up top for some nice subtle clouds, and I'm going in this kind of brownish green just to kind of create a nice soft base layer for where I'll be adding some foresty trees later. And kind of going at it all willy-nilly. I'm not too worried about the colors matching specifically or any specific way, just because it's just a very, very soft shade that I'm going down with, and it's just to help give myself a guide later when I'm painting. When I do this kind of painting, I tend to, I don't want to say wing it, but I've done this style of painting a lot, so I kind of let it happen organically, I guess, which is the fancy way of saying winging it, I suppose. But mostly I just kind of put the paint down, let it kind of flow where it wants to go. If I feel like I want areas to be a little bit lighter or a little darker, I'll go in, like I'm doing here, with a little bit of a drier brush and just kind of pull that pigment up and off the page. So that's giving me some nice valleys where fog is settling and kind of hanging out for a little bit, because there are little pockets of like warmer air, cooler air, and that's just what's happening there. Going in with a little bit more of that kind of brownish green, a little darker, just to give myself a little bit more of a guide for where I want my background to kind of fade away into, and where to put my foreground flavor. So there's a little bit of lint that I'm picking up there, there's hair over there I'm picking up. There's this kind of weird horizontal line on the page, and I'm not 100% sure where that came from, but it might have something to do with just the manufacturing of the paper and the sizing or something, but I don't know. This is the first time I'm using 300-pound press or cold press watercolor paper. Say that 10 times fast, I dare you. And this is from Fabrino. I picked it up last year when I was doing some just general paint supplies. I usually work with the 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, as opposed to this, which is a thick, nice and thick paper. And so this is me just kind of messing around with it, using a little bit of the technique I usually use, which is this very wet on wet technique, to get these very soft and subtle gradations of mist and fog and tree line. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going in with a little bit of a darker green, kind of starting to define a few other areas, a little bit more of the foreground or midground. It's still very white, as you can see. There's a lot of shimmer happening on this page. Just letting it do its thing, letting it run into itself, kind of bleed all over the place, really settle in to the cracks of the page. The crevices. I don't know. Cold pressed watercolor paper has like little dimples in it, and depending on the brand, sometimes they're really aggressive, sometimes they're a little more subtle. This one's a little more on the subtle side, so it was giving me some really nice kind of gentle color deposits. Because whenever I paint, I don't usually just use a solid swipe of color. I usually mix it with a couple other tones to give it just a little bit more depth. Going in with just a rag, just to kind of put extra water. Add a little bit more lighter, softer edges for where it's going to be super foggy in the painting later, or just where I want it to be a nice, subtle gradation, subtly wispy things. Now I'm going in with a little bit more of a bluish green. Again, just add a little bit more color variation. Otherwise, I feel like when you paint forest scenes or tree scenes and you're really only using like one color, it can feel very flat. It is really fun to work in a single color for a painting, but when I went into this kind of thing, I tend to do a little bit more. Coming back after letting this dry. Sometimes I will use a hairdryer to dry things. Today I just wanted to let it dry by itself naturally, so I made myself a cup of tea, came back, more tea. So, tea breaks, very, very important part of painting. Tell you what, I almost always am drinking coffee or tea when I am painting. It kind of gives me something to do with my non-dominant hand. Kind of helps calm my brain a little bit down, so I can really just focus on what I'm doing with my paintbrush hand. Yeah, just how my brain works when I'm doing this kind of thing. I need that little bit of distraction. So now I'm going in, adding a little bit more just color for a little bit more of that mid-ground tone. As you can see, there's kind of this nice soft fade in the middle where there's like the lightness of the sky and the darkness of the sky and a little bit of that hillside. And I'll be going in with a little bit of a light tone later, lighter tone green, gray later to kind of add just a little bit more depth there. But I'm so far really liking these soft gradations that I have going on here. I'm going in and mixing in some greens and browns. And I'm using, I believe this is like a number 6 brush, but it has a nice tip to it that's a little bit sharper. So I like to use that to get these nice kind of tree line shapes. And I just kind of do quick movements with these. It doesn't have to be perfect. Most trees are not exactly the same in nature, so when I'm painting them, I don't expect them to be the same either. I do want them to be roughly the same height or a similar height, just because when you get to different elevations, trees kind of stop at a specific height, so I'm trying to mimic that. But you still get some tall ones and some short guys and things like that, so it's good. And I usually will kind of wet the area beneath where I'm going to be putting the treetops. That way, if it's a little bit on the darker side, it kind of softly blends in to the hillside beneath it. But it also gives me, it makes it a little easier to mix the paint or blend later if I go a little too heavy-handed with the paint, with the pigment rather. So adding a little bit more here and there. And I will go in and add a couple deposits of just like a little random drop of color here and there as well. Again, just to give it a little bit more variation, a little bit more texture. I kind of have 2 jars of water going. I only started doing this recently, but I do like it. So the main idea is you primarily use one jar to really rinse your brush off and one jar to pick up plain water. And at some point I always mess it up, but at least it gives the idea that I might have clean water eventually later on. So it kind of works. But I have remembered to keep my drink on my left side. That way I do not dip my paintbrush in it anymore. So I'm learning slowly but surely. Yeah. So again, this for me was kind of my first time using a 300-pound watercolor paper. So I was really liking how it held onto the water while I was painting. It felt like it made the painting go a little faster than if it was 140-pound press because it holds onto the water in a different way. It's a little bit more absorption, a little bit more absorbed. It absorbs it better. I don't know. There's a word there that I'm having such a hard time saying. But it holds onto the moisture a little bit more. So when you are doing these kind of soft details, you can work the paint a little bit longer and let it slowly blend into itself. Where I feel like with a little bit of a thinner paper, 140 press, you kind of get these pools of water sometimes where it buckles a little bit more, or it'll absorb into the paper too fast, so you'll get these weird dry spots, things like that. So I felt like I was able to get some really, really nice, soft, subtle cloud shapes and tree line hillside shapes. My dog is, I don't know if you can hear her, she is snuggling next to me and a little annoyed at me. She says it's time for bed. I say it's time to record it. So I'm going in really nice and soft and gentle, just very light green, and then also kind of fading it out with more water here, just to give just that very subtle hint of treetops and things, because sometimes when you look out, like, everything is just covered by fog, there's nothing. But other times you go and look out and there's just these like really, really lovely, soft, almost sheer blankets of fog across the hilltops, and you just barely get to see the tree lines, and you get to see these wispy bits coming up from the mountain, and it's so great. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. I love painting it. So much fun. So now I'm going in, doing a little bit more of the foreground, so it's a little bit darker, a little bit of a richer tone. Because again, when you're painting, usually what's closer to you tends to be a little bit more in focus, a little bit richer, a little bit more vibrant. Whereas things that are further away, the atmosphere kind of fades it out a little bit. So working on capturing that a little bit more here. Probably could have used a little bit of a bigger brush on this bottom half, but yeah, whatever, it happens. Stuck with it. And because this is more foreground, I am getting a little bit more detail oriented with the treetops a little bit more, giving them a little bit more definition, more defined shape, not as close together, that kind of thing. And again, adding those little droplets of color here and there to kind of give it a little more depth. And then I realized I wanted to carry this a little further over, so just kind of went a little wild here in a minute. I'm just kind of going in and picking up any droplets that I had that I didn't want. And then I accidentally dropped my paintbrush, which happens a lot. But I kind of, when I pulled up some paint, I really liked this little wispy bit here, so I decided to go back in, re-wet, and try to lift some of that paint. And it actually worked a lot better than it has in the past for me, so I'm wondering if it is this heavier paper makes it a little easier to do that lift with. I know certain shades of greens and yellows can be really, really finicky when you're trying to lift them, so I was really surprised at how well this lifted. So I'm really, really happy with that. And then I'm going in again with that greenish blue, a little bit more of a blue shade compared to some of the other ones, because again, different treetops, different shades, different species of trees. There's more than one kind of evergreen in our forest here in the southeast, so it's good to be able to capture a little bit of both. Yeah. And then I kind of blended that in, so, you know, all that work is for nothing. But that's kind of the fun part about watercolor, is it's really fun to blend it and mix it and get it to do just some different things. And this one is kind of inspired by the view from my apartment. When I look out from my apartment, I'm looking over onto Douglas Island, which has a little bit more of a softer hill landscape versus downtown Juneau or other parts of Southeast Alaska where there's some really, really steep and kind of more jagged and abrupt mountainscape hillsides, if that makes sense. So these are a little bit more softer, a little bit more gradual. So it was a really, really nice foggy day that day. So I was getting some good fog inspo and having a good time just staring out the window and just really enjoying the fog. My apartment is kind of in a weird layout where I can kind of see into my neighbor's apartment if I'm not careful, so I have to be really, really careful to like look in a very specific direction when I look out my window, so I'm not accidentally looking into their apartment. So that's a fun thing to deal with. So you can see that I've had these very subtle kind of tree lines in the background, getting a little bit more defined in the foreground. When I was a kid, I absolutely love looking at the backgrounds of like Disney movies and like animated films and trying to figure out how they made them and then like superimpose the characters on top of it. So I've always really loved kind of creating landscapey paintings like this where it's just like could be potentially the background for some characters in like a close-up face profile, more of an intimate shot or something. And in photography, an intimate shot just means like close-up, but not necessarily like, hey, I'm gonna make out with you. So that kind of a thing. So anyway, that sounded weird. Whatever. But I always really like that idea of just kind of capturing a snapshot of a landscape as opposed to a whole mountainside. I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to do, I don't know, kind of that kind of landscape painting that was really popular in the 1800s, where just like these massive hillsides and beautiful, beautiful landscape paintings. But I really like kind of just capturing like little snippets of a hillside or a single peak or just like the subtleties of a mountainside versus the whole shebang. So that's how I feel about it. Sometimes when I'm doing these voiceovers, I kind of feel like I'm rambling, so let me know what you think about these, because I just like talking about painting and like talking about mountains and talking about random things, so that's what I'm gonna keep doing unless y'all don't like it. And if you do like it, let me know. Anyway, continuing, creating a little bit more softness there, just a subtle bit of green. Because this one is a block, I now have to cut it out of the block. Just so I mean by the edges are adhered to themselves. So I'm using this lovely weapon of choice, aka a letter opener, to just relieve the edges of the paper from its adhesive. And I didn't want to rip it, so I took my time on this because I was scared. Because I really liked how this painting turned out. So